the once mighty kingdom that David ruled over, has gone through division and has fallen. Prior to the period that Ezekiel is addressing in this, Israel has divided into two kingdoms, a northern kingdom and a southern one. The northern kingdom of Israel is the first to fall to foreign empires. The kingdom of Judah, where Jerusalem is located, holds out a little longer. The first third of Ezekiel takes place during that period when Judah is under siege and is being threatened. Ezekiel speaks to the people about what is going on and warns them. The last third of Ezekiel takes place after Judah falls, when those who have been captured have been sent into exile. They did what empires often do, of taking groups of people and scattering them out in different parts of the empire, making them weaker and less likely to unite and to plan a revolt. The last third is when Ezekiel goes into exile too, and he addresses what's happening at that point. In the middle third, which we read from today, is a period where you have these very rich and vivid images, these oracles of both comfort and judgment that Ezekiel gives to the people. We read today just from a portion of chapter 34. But the entire chapter, which I'll discuss, uses the imagery of a shepherd and how shepherds care for the sheep. In the first portion of the chapter, Ezekiel compares God to a good shepherd that looks out for the sheep, that makes sure that those who are hungry are fed, those who are sick are tended to, a shepherd that cares for the flock. This is a familiar image in the Bible. We see it in Psalm 23, and Jesus uses this image to refer to himself. In the second part of the chapter, he switches from talking about the heavenly shepherd, God, who cares for the people, to the earthly shepherds, the kings. God is caring for the people of God, even in the midst of exile. But the earthly kings are subject to corruption. And Ezekiel looks back to those kings who ruled over the people in the days before the fall. And Ezekiel blames them for doing that. You did not live up to the fullness of God's law. You did not care for those who were poor and vulnerable and weak. But instead you allowed yourself to be lavished with great abundance and wealth, while the people that you were supposed to be caring for suffered. They are the bad shepherds, and they are the ones whose misdeeds have brought judgment upon the people. This is a word that speaks to us during this time of year as well. You and I live in very different circumstances. We're not a part of an empire. We live in a democracy where we have the ability to affect our legislators through petitioning, voting, and other means. We also live as a part of a certain economy. We're keen to look at our government as it influences us, but we overlook just the great effect that our economy and culture has on us. And we have the ability to affect it as well by the choices that we make. So in our day and time, as we consider who we are, we fall under the category of these shepherds. And are we shepherds that follow the example and the values of God, caring for the weak and the vulnerable? Or are we more like the corrupt shepherds, looking out for our own best interests, despite those who are suffering around us? In one of the verses that wasn't read this morning, Ezekiel offers a word of warning to these corrupt shepherds and says to them, "You made yourselves fat while the poor among you were starving." That's a really hard verse for us to swallow 3 days after Thanksgiving. as we think about this time of the year. And I tend to think of the period from Halloween all the way to New Year's as one big holiday celebration. A time when in our culture and in the free market economy, we're being encouraged to lavish things on ourselves and on those who are close to us. And that's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with doing that to a certain extent. But we have to be careful about looking to our economy for our values. Our economy is based on competing for our time, our attention, our money, our credit history, and nowadays our data. But our values come from God and who we are as God's people. And God values everyone. God values caring for the weak and the vulnerable, as Ezekiel talks about in chapter 4, and as Jesus talked about in the psalm we read today. Those are the values of God, not just the values of self-indulgence. And there are the times that we, even as Christians, can get caught up in the mix and say that the way to celebrate this time of year is by indulging ourselves and those close to us, and doing so in the name of the Lord. But that's not what Ezekiel and Matthew's gospel have in mind for us today. We, as God's people, are people who care for the weak and the vulnerable. That's the radical nature of hospitality as we practice it. Anybody in any part of the world cares for themselves and their family and those who are close to them. But Christian hospitality means that my neighbor, the stranger, the person I don't know, is just as much an interest to me as those who share my household. That's the nature of hospitality that both Jesus and Ezekiel are talking about today. And as we go forward into this holiday season, there are ways that we can address this that give us time to celebrate the trappings of this time of the year, but also to remember our values as the people of God. A clergy friend of mine made a deal with her son, who was in kindergarten, and said to him that for every one gift he received at Christmas time, he must participate in one mission project at their church. She was the associate pastor of a very large church, so there are a number of things that were going on, and a number of opportunities for him to give and to serve. And she instilled in him, and continues to, those values of caring for others who are vulnerable, and not just looking out for ourselves. In another church that I served, I had a 6-year-old girl who was in a confirmation class that I worked with. And whenever she had her birthday party, she thought about the things that her church was involved with. And she told her parents that what she wanted to do was to have a party and have people over, and they'd have refreshments and play games. But instead of asking for gifts, she wanted to ask the children that were invited to bring canned goods for a local food bank. And once the parents heard about this of the children, they were excited. And just like with last week, they brought in bags and cases of things. The little girl was a little bit bashful and shy. So she was somewhat overwhelmed when she found out that her parents invited somebody from the local newspaper. But they interviewed her and they photographed her and they printed a story about what she was doing. And with that, they were able to help teach her about the nature of her Christian witness. Because once the word got out around the community about this, other little girls and boys started doing this with their holiday parties as well. I know several of your Sunday school classes have done the study on Advent that Adam Hamilton wrote. And he mentioned about the influence that these kind of passages have on him at this time of the year, and not making it something that just culminates in this self-congratulatory family affair. And one of the ways that he and his church responds to that is for their Christmas Eve service. The offering that is taken up that night always goes to missions that they support, both locally and abroad. And he said that not only has that helped to fund a number of these outreach opportunities that they have, but it's also added to their witness. As other people came to this large, lavish mega church, and realized that these were the values that they had. Now, Hamilton is the pastor of a megachurch, and they have resources that we don't necessarily. But this church does a really fine job of responding to people and caring for others who are vulnerable. You do a fine job of carrying on the values of God, even when the values of our culture might challenge that. As was announced earlier today, we had that generous outpouring of faith last week, when anybody who came in was greeted by all of those bags that were in the narthex. And on any Sunday you come in and you see the bookshelf with the different repository areas for the different missions and things that we support here locally. I also appreciate those of you who are concerned about clutter, those of you who are like parents going into a child's room who don't want to be too scattered. But I'm glad that we're able to neatly arrange that so when people come into this church as visitors, they immediately see this is who we are and these are our values. It's one of the things that I continually heard with our Choosing the Faithful Path work group. As we talked about everything this church does and put it on board, it was almost a little bit mind-boggling when people got their minds around how generous people are with their outgiving and their support. The outreach committee will meet tomorrow night, and they'll be making plans for the coming year. And I invite you to all to be in prayer for them as they do that work. And to consider both personally, as well as small groups and Sunday school classes, and as a church, how we respond to this particular gospel message. We are called to be God's people. And God's people love themselves and their families, but they love their neighbors as well. God supports us and God provides for us. And it is out of what God has given to us that we care for the poor and the vulnerable, that we share love of God with love of neighbor. That's what it means to be one of God's subjects, to look to God as the King, who gives us all of this power and authority and instills on us not just resources, but values that we share with a hungry and a hurting world. Amen.